So if you don't want to be recorded, please feel free to keep your cameras off, use the chat function as well.
Okay, so we got a lot of stuff in here that's about like new things, new ideas, ways of seeing things, openness, diversity and perspectives, and being able to express things, a lot of things about expression, artistic expression, arts, free-flowing ideas, equality, leveled playing field, letting go of tradition. Ooh, I like those. Oh, beauty. Yes, beauty. Wow. If any of these things are resonating with you, feel free to pop it into the chat. So it's interesting when we think about how this relates to equity-based co-production, because often, we think about what creativity means and the work that we do and the things that we're involved in. And when we're thinking about it from an equity perspective and thinking about how do we co-design and co-produce and share power with people and have that level playing field, where does creativity fit in there? So these are a lot of really great ideas. I think we've got some people here who know what they want or know what they do around creativity. Finding common humanity. The working together, that's something that I hadn't thought of until just now, that I think I defaulted to automatically assuming that creativity, in my experience, means being with other people and the new ideas and exchange and conversation and problem solving.
I think we're at maybe a space where one more person is typing, but please feel free to keep adding to this. We are going to take these ideas and move into our sort of panel presentations. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to invite Tara to tell us a bit more about what creativity means in your work.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm just sharing my screen there. I hope that's coming up okay. Just shout if it's not. So thank you so much for inviting me to be part of the session this afternoon. Afternoon here in Scotland, morning with you over in Canada. So I thought I would share a little bit about a project that I worked on back in 2019, so just before the pandemic. And at the time, I was working as a researcher at the Glasgow School of Art. And we were working with, in collaboration with a local care home. And I thought when I was sort of preparing for the presentation, I was thinking about, what is the value of using arts-based approaches in co-design when we're working with people in a design process. And I just kind of noted down some of the things that were coming to mind when using different arts-based methods. So really around supporting people to share their stories and create narratives together about a particular topic. How, when we are thinking about different methods that we can use, we can really tailor those to the people who are involved in the design process with us, to the topic that we're exploring, and to what it is that we're trying to create at the end of the day. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But really trying to support people to be creative, to imagine what the future could look like for whatever it is that we're exploring, and also how using different arts-based approaches can support that collaboration and sharing, and look at how we, if we're bringing together different groups of people, how we try and balance that power in the room. But it's also a way, because you're using maybe different visual methods or creative methods, you can actually start to validate knowledge and insights in the session with people, because you're making that visible to people so they can say whether they agree with it or they don't agree with it, and they can be more critical. And also it supports that decision-making process when you're going through in a co-design process and actually making decisions about what it is that you're creating. And then another thing that I think is really important, and that we probably need to do a bit more work on is around that kind of legacy. So when, you know, because a lot of our projects are kind of time-based, what are we leaving people with? What are we leaving behind? What are we supporting people to kind of continue with in whatever it is that they want to in their particular context that they're exploring? So this project that I'm going to share with you today, probably, I have to say, very close to my heart and a very, very special project, because it actually brought in music, which is one of my passions and actually what my PhD was in. So it was really nice to be able to bring that back in to like a design process and actually use music as a way to explore with people. It was set within, as I said, a care home context. So we were working with residents and staff and family members and volunteers. And the project was really about how do you support and enable human rights within that context? And how do you make human rights more? The program was funded through a Rights Made Real program in Scotland that was about how you really make human rights real within for older people within the care home context. And I mentioned before about, you know, how can you really, when you're doing research, you're doing co-design, how can you tailor the different methods that you use to the people that you're working with in the topic? And we wanted to have conversations with people about what life was like living within the care home, and how they used music in their life. And to do that, rather than just sort of have a conversation, we also created a visual tool where we used different elements of life in a care home to actually have conversations with people, but we turned it into a game. So it had a little dice along with it that allowed people to roll the dice and pick the topic that they wanted to discuss with us in relation to their experience of living and working within the care home. And then in the images at the bottom, when we were then looking at how important music was to people in their life, we used a little tool. We made a little album and got people to think about what music was important to them, and what types of things they enjoyed in terms of music. And this really helped us, you know, connect with people throughout the program. This is the visual of the whole co-design process, which looks, I'm sorry you won't be able to read it in detail, but it's, I'll pop a link in the chat afterwards, or maybe someone can pop a link to the project. You can read about it in more detail and zoom in on different parts. But this was like the whole co-design process, which went from, you know, these kind of observations and interviews right through to different workshops with people. And then we also prototyped with people in the care home, where we created a community medley, we called it. And this was based on all of the suggestions and ideas that we got through the co-design workshops, to actually look at how could we develop music-based activities that supported people to express what was important to them, enabled them to connect with the community, and also was able to really share what care home life is really like, and how to support that positive stories around care home living. So we had that over 3 days, and that allowed us to try out the different activities with people in the care home. And then we also got people to feed back to us, and we were able to tailor and tweak the ideas. And then what we created at the end of the project was what we called the Remix Toolkit. So this was a little paper-based toolkit you could print off. It's also available online, and it has all of the different musical activities that staff, volunteers, and care home community can look to use to look at how music can be used in that environment to support people with their human rights. So I hope that kind of gives a flavour of the actual co-design process, but also the way that we used arts-based approaches with people to really explore what music meant to them in that context, and also helped us prototype with them how music could play a role in building connections and sharing stories, and also supported us in the research process. And I'm just going to play a little bit of a video, hopefully. Let me just share a different screen now. That just gives you a flavour, I hope, of the project. The whole process really involved collecting stories from residents, from staff, from families, then doing some co-design workshops to look at how could we involve everyone to explore how we could grow and create connections through music, and then finally putting that together into the Anderson's Community Medley, which was a programme of music activities and exploring and testing out how those could work.
1, 2, 12.
When I heard about this, I just thought it'd be a fantastic way to mix everything in a bit with the community, especially with music, because who doesn't love music?
The project has been amazing for our care home and for our residents and for the staff and for the family, all getting involved. It has been great seeing everybody interacting. Music does feed the soul, and that clearly shows itself in the happy faces that our Anderson family have here.
What we get out of a project like this, I think it's quite simple. Seeing your residents happy and interacting, that's for me. You know, I love to see my residents smiling, happy, enjoying themselves. That's where I get my job satisfaction from.
And it just sort of made me feel like the power of music is just so potent when you've got people who are sitting there who are a bit lost. When they hear those songs that they knew before, they're locked away in their memory and bang, back they come.
It takes you out of the ordinary. You can start thinking back memories and things like that, and so on and so forth.
For me, it's letting the spirit fly, I would say, letting the soul kind of fly a bit, and you kind of get out of yourself.
I don't know, it does my heart good.
Just to give them that wee spark again, that for me is a huge reward. You know, that's what I love about playing in a care home. And today, my goodness, that was great. Everybody was alive. It was just that's nice.
It's music, though, isn't it? Music. That's something. Do you know this? As bad as a person's dementia can be, they never forget the words of songs.
It's way surpassed anything that I think any of us ever anticipated.
Music is so personal to us. Different songs mean different things, and different pieces of music can evoke certain memories. It can transport us back to times in our lives. It can remind us of different people and different places.
We will continue to, I think, go on so much further. We can do so much more, and that's quite an exciting time ahead. You know, we've got the choir, we're going to look at the choir morning. It was just wonderful. And these things, it's not huge things we have to do. It's just actually little things that open up for everybody. And it's just the joy, the fun, the laughter. Look at how everybody's been. It's been incredible, hasn't it?
I kind of think we've definitely found the right way forward to do this project. It's more than I expected it to be.
I think the way that the programme has brought members of the community into Anderson's, it's been really magical to see. especially the connections between the residents and the children. And I think seeing those magical moments with families. And I think for the communities who've come in, what I really hope from this project is that they understand that this is life here within Anderson's. And actually this program, although we've had things over these 3 days, this happens all the time. This is the way of life here. It's magical, it's a family, and I really hope that more people and members of the public, communities that are living in different parts of Scotland can really see the way that this is life here. Thank you so much, everyone. So I hope that gives a bit of a flavour there of the project, and I'm happy to take any questions and comments later on in our discussion. Thank you so much. Looking forward to it.
Thanks so much, Jared. That was so fabulous. And I just want to point out there was a lot of good comments. And one, Michelle said that why isn't happiness the desired outcome more often? So I love that so much. And hopefully we can return back to that in our question and answer period. Joe, I will hand it off to you.
Thank you, Sam. I'm just going to try and share my screen. Can everyone see that? Awesome. So that was amazing, Tara. I'm going to have a real challenge to follow on from that, but I'll do my best. I've taken a slightly different approach. So I was fortunate enough earlier this year to be part of a team of people who worked on co-editing and producing a special issue for a journal called Evidence and Policy. And the title of the special issue was exploring the role of creative practices in co-production. And one of the papers that was submitted and published in it came from the Co-Design Hub. So that's where I first met Sam and was introduced to people like Michelle and others. And we had, I mean, it was an amazing group of authors that we worked with over a period of just over a year, I think. And, you know, there were some that were unsuccessful. I think we had about 11 papers in total, and a mixture of research papers, practice papers. And in looking at all of the papers that were submitted, particularly those that were published, the 11 that were published, we pulled out a set of themes, and we didn't go through a kind of really robust kind of thematic analysis. It was just, you know, the editors and some colleagues and critical friends that, you know, went through and pulled out some of these things. And I think, I mean, there's several that jump out immediately in relation to the work that Tara has just presented. So this idea of, you know, it's music's good for the soul. I think that all the sort of creative practices are in some way, in varying degrees to different people, fulfilling. There has this element of being very fulfilling and accessible. So whilst, you know, everyone can have a go at things to do with creativity, some might be, you know, some people may find it a bit more intimidating than others, but those barriers are easier to break down than perhaps the kind of barriers or perceptions around, you know, the technicality of research or science and terms like that. So what I've got is a sort of smorgasbord of different projects that they're not all mine. They're people from sort of Lab for Living and friends of mine that have given me permission to talk about their work. And I think it's hopefully going to sort of pick up on a number of these themes and sort of show a diversity of different sort of creative approaches. And I'm going to try, it sort of follows a chronology of my sort of career in Lab for Living as well. So I'm going to try and weave in how it's impacted me and my sort of journey from where I started off as a design engineer. And that was my sort of training. And I sort of, if I think about sort of design as a spectrum of sort of creative and sort of arts-based and conceptual design through to sort of more technical and engineering-based design, I started off very much at that sort of technical end. And it's been a journey for me moving along that to sort of far more creative approaches and methods. So when I first moved to Lab for Living, there was a project that had just been started by colleagues that I was involved with called Future Bathroom, which was looking at the design of domestic bathrooms for older people. And and how they might be better suited to their needs, but then suit a whole lifespan. So instead of having to refit or retrofit for older people, it was about things that could adapt and change with time. And there were a number of different ways in which people were involved in co-producing the whole project. But I've picked out one specific example here, which was our LULAB, we called it. So this was a huge installation within the university structure, and it's a very public space that people, not just students and staff, but public, go through this space as well. And it was like a maze. So people entered in and followed sort of different corridors around and were interacting with the tangible components of different features and functions within a bathroom space, and then leaving their stories, their narratives, their thoughts and feelings and emotions. And the wonderful thing about this particular kind of mode was that it was anonymous. So it picked up on the cues of graffiti within sort of toilet spaces that we'd sort of led people towards that kind of thinking with graffiti sort of parts of the installation. But there was this ways in which sequential people picked up on the narratives and comments of others and built these threads and stories that followed on one from the other as they made comments, a bit like sort of how Twitter threads might build up these days. And this was before Twitter. So it was that kind of sort of analog version of Twitter in a sense. But and the censorship in this was sort of interesting as well, because there were some students who were quite, should we say, fruity with their contributions. But it was incredible in the sort of ways in which the tangibility of this enabled people of all kinds to engage and offer. And we had about 1,000 people go through this in the space of a week, and the diversity of people was enormous. I mean, it was just huge, and significant contributions all the way through. So in other parts of this, there was the sort of technical design components, but in terms of manifesting them in sort of some sort of tangible form, again, and that allows and enabled a diversity of people to engage with the sort of functions and forms and emotions and technicality of how bathrooms work or don't work, and how concepts might work or not work for them. So this was a kind of really early stage in my career. And I guess in terms of creativity, there's sort of real elements within the exhibition space, but this was sort of more familiar, perhaps prototyping territory. And this was followed on by a project which I got involved with far more, which was working with people with motor neuron disease. And again, it's very product design orientated. And you'll notice the sort of creative components whilst we were pushing people to think about more expansively about what could be and what couldn't be, with deliberately making some of these provocative sort of prototypes and artifacts. They still maintain that very sort of functional and technical component as well. But in a later project where we were working with children and young people around issues relating to asthma, we started to introduce sort of storytelling features within sort of modes of storytelling that were more familiar to them. So there was the sort of digital cartoon strip, bit strip storyboarding methods that many people were familiar with of that age group. And this was something that had come out in terms of method, had been defined by a group of people where we were designing the methods before applying them. This was something that they said in terms of developing stories and people being able to contribute stories. This was something that they recommended, and it worked beautifully well. The idea of using these was very familiar to a number of people. They needed very little training to do it, so it had that accessibility in terms of enabling people to contribute to this particular project in the early stages. Then there was this particular project was a piece of work by a colleague of mine called Virginia Heath. And it was funded and supported by Bernardo's and a number of charities, and explored issues of sex trafficking within the UK. And from a group of people who had experiences of sex trafficking, they taught them and trained them in skills of writing stories and making films and editing. And then they enabled them to, or supported them in this process of making their film and their story and documenting them. And then from that, they then stepped into a stage of making a film that was intended to help prevent sex trafficking, and support people to seek support for themselves and try to help them if they were in danger of being in the sex trafficking. And this was something that obviously within the sort of co-production component had that immensely cathartic and therapeutic, as well as capacity building for the people that were involved, but had also that accessibility to people that they were trying to reach, because it came authentically from people who had that similar experience, and that authenticity of what was being talked about and how it was being communicated really reached and cut through to people that it needed to. And this has gone on to the sort of evaluation of how effective this was, has shown that it has reached more people than those that sort of other initiatives that have gone before. And it has also been adopted and used within training of forces like the police force, for instance, in supporting them to understand that victims are victims and not in any way to blame for things like this. There's another piece of work this is actually featured in the special issue as well, so you can have a look at this article within the special issue. It's a friend of mine called Kate Beckett, who has used forum theatre as a way of engaging people within the process of synthesizing evidence from different sources, understanding lived experiences of post-traumatic psychological stress, and in enabling practitioners to think critically about how their practice may or may not be improved. And one of the things that she sort of crucially picks up on, the methodology of forum theatre is something that has come from that process of enabling disenfranchised people to engage. It was originally as one of a collection of methods that was developed for political forum, and how people disenfranchised people within Brazil can engage in policy making and lawmaking. And one of the things that she points out with the methods that she's used is that the agency people have to change things. So it's not just about being able to tell a story, but then being able to say, I would like the story to change and be different in this way. So people have that sort of capacity and capability to go, this is how the story could be different, and change stuff. And that agency is really about engaging people in the process, but also in sort of supporting the narrative of communicating what those changes could be really powerfully and effectively to a desired audience later on as well. And in some of my own work, again, later on in my journey, we were looking at issues in this particular project relating to people with a variety of long-term conditions, and how long-term conditions of a variety of kinds can affect people's physical function and their ability to do all kinds of activities of daily living and daily life. And at the very start of the project, which was followed a realist methodology, we adopted a process of collective and participatory theory building, where we used Lego and a method called Lego Serious Play as a way of inviting people to talk about their experiences and then tell us why they thought certain things worked and didn't work, and build that into collective theory statements around why we think one thing works for some people in some circumstances and not for others. And out of the back of this workshop, we had a number of, I think it was about 20 odd theory statements that then became the basis of the realist methodology for the entire project thereafter. And there were other elements of the project that ran through that were all participatory and co-produced, but the idea that, you know, there are only some parts of research that people can get involved in, and things like theory building is not, you know, I think we blew several of the health researchers we were working with at the time, so blew their minds with the idea that people could be involved in theory building in this sort of participatory way. And in one of the projects I've done really, so this is a COVID-based project, there was a process of collecting evidence about how people might be affected by serious incidents within the NHS. And there were very sort of oppositional views, but we wanted to convey or enable people to get to grips with evidence and make it interactive. So there was a process of collecting evidence from literature, interviews, and sort of documentary analysis of policy across all the hospitals. And that was all done in a co-produced way, but then the evidence was turned into sort of vignettes and stories and translated into this game where the game player takes on the role of an investigator, and how they follow through and the decisions they make changes what evidence they get hold of and the decisions and conclusions they come to. And this was sent out to all of our co-design partners before they started designing. So they had this really comprehensive understanding of evidence from which they could then also, based on their experiences, contribute to a design process. And the comments we had back from this was sort of the first time that someone had understood the perspective from the member of staff or from an investigator or from a family member. So it's about, again, it's that interaction with evidence and enabling people to have a sense-making process in this engaged and interactive way that creative forms and tangible forms allow us to offer and do. I'm going to draw it to a close there because I think we were kind of pushing the time frame on this. But this you can find these themes in the special issue, and I think from us it's kind of like an early and very, as I say, a very rough sort of thematic analysis in a very loosest sense. But these were really important features of the creative methods that we felt had a real value in enabling people and enabling research to be of value as much as anything else, as well as enabling people to join in. So I'm going to stop there.
Wow. I think my mind's blown too. Thank you so much, Joe and Tara. We're going to spend a few minutes now just sharing all the questions. I'm sure everybody's got lots. I know I do. So there's another Slido where you can pop questions in. Is that correct, Sam?
Nope.
No. Okay. Ignore what I just said. There's a chat box. There's microphone. Yeah. Feel free to share all your questions and any comments, even observations that'll get other people's questions going. I think I'm really struck by the incredible variety of ways creativity can manifest in extremely different projects and settings and problems.
I have a question. I love the presentations. First of all, it's so nice to see you again, Tara and Joe. I was struck, as Louise was, by the very many different methods of, let's say, data collection or participation that you both employed. And I'm wondering, for people, especially researchers who are more used to traditional interviews, focus groups, do you ever get resistance? And if so, how do you mitigate that? How do you manage it?
Such a good question, Michelle.
I can come in. So I think that's really interesting because I'm sort of trying to think in all the experiences of where there has been resistance. I would say that probably when we get the most resistance is maybe when we are trying to encourage people to come out of their comfort zone. So if we are using much more physical methods, like getting people to role play and that type of thing, people are sometimes not comfortable doing that, which is completely understandable. And so I think certainly in the way that we've tried to design sessions before, if we've got, if it's a very like multi perspective, if we've got lots of people coming from you know, different perspectives and different experiences, then the way we've tried to mitigate against that is to actually have then different options for people, so that the people, you know, so that we can have like a role play group, we can have a more like Lego group, or and try and build that into the session so that it does give people that flexibility and options. And then it also allows people to take on sort of different roles in the group that they join that they're then comfortable with, while still trying to prompt people who might be quieter and might not be able or feel that they have something to contribute. So it is trying to build that flexibility and options in, I think, is the way. And yeah, I think it's just so important to think about who you're bringing together and who you're working with, and trying to sort of gauge what they might be comfortable with at the outset, I would say.
I see there's some other questions, some hands raised. Kinga, would you like to go?
Sure, please. Thank you so much for those presentations. It's just such incredible work. I'm going to go and read up on all the links in the chat. The one thing that I really loved about them is how sort of like tactile and interactive they all were, right? Building with Lego, like the in-person human connections. I'm wondering, over the past 2.5 years of COVID, that just not going away, have you thought about how some of this could be, like, I think there's no replacement for the in-person connection, but if sometimes circumstances warrant it, have you thought about how some of those ideas can be done virtually, or how you can do co-design virtually? Is that something you've been thinking about at all?
Can I jump in and I'll just give you a response to that? That's an awesome question. And we have been thinking about it. We've tried different things, but I can also, if I can, make a plug for a project that's currently ongoing with collaborators in Canada and the US as well. So I think we've got some people online here so Kate Sellen and Mariam, they are working with ourselves and Sarah Walker from Canada, exploring exactly this. And if there's anyone who would like to contribute to that, we'd really love you to get in touch and contribute your experiences of what you've done and the things. And we're trying to sort of really sort of put out the things that didn't work as much as the things that did, because this is where we feel that there's a kind of greatest value in learning. So there's I can share some links to those things, and I'll sort of drop them into the chat if that's okay. But I think there's the idea of the sort of the importance of the tangibility is something that in some of the ways in which we've tried to facilitate co-design during the pandemic, we've really tried to sort of maintain some of that. Sometimes it's been through sending people stuff in the post, so we'll actually send them kits or packs or some sort of objects and artifacts and images that form part of different activities and exercises within an online process. So that game one I showed, that was one that we sent to people individually, but we invited them to do that individually before they came online. So there's this way of sort of using time in a sort of slightly different way that the pandemic enabled us to do, which I think is interesting, one of the things that we're exploring. But we also invited people to use their own things, within their own environment. So different activities that, I don't know, for example, one of the things might be asking people to sort of identify something that they don't necessarily like, but they can't live without, and bring that to a workshop. And there's sort of provocative questions you can then go into with people and discussion with people about what it is that they can't live without about that thing, and different ways in which that could be realized or manifest. And that enables that sort of creative thinking just from an object with which they're incredibly familiar with. So I think that's, but we've certainly not been exhaustive, and we certainly don't know, what might work better in some situations than others. And that's part of the reason why this ongoing project is hopefully going to address some of those issues or questions.
Thank you, Joe. We will look for some of those links in the chat. Ian, you have your hand up as well.
Hi, this is a question for, I guess for Joe, but primarily because I know a little bit of his background. I wonder if you could reflect on how your own practice and capacity for creativity has developed over the years, and whether there are activities or practices that you can have engaged in as a researcher to develop your own creativity. I come from a quant modeling background and have kind of come to co-production because of my experience of the limitations of theory and evidence-based approaches. So just, looking to develop my practice in this area.
Oh, that's a great question.
Is that another webinar?
No. Well, it could be. I'm afraid that my answer to that, based on how I've done it, is not quick and easy, but it's been fun. So I moved from mechanical engineering department to an art and design research centre where we set up Lab for Living. And when I first moved to Lab for the Art and Design Research Centre, there were people, artists and sculptors and makers and of all kinds, illustrators, doing research using creative methods that I were completely unfamiliar with. And my mind was just blown straight away. And I spent the first 2 years just immersing myself really in almost shadowing people that were already working there, not sort of working almost as an RA for other people, just doing things to help them on their projects, trying to just assimilate and understand what was going on. And I mean, I can't say that after 2 years I knew it was just the first steps in this kind of journey. But then it was the sort of ways of trying different things myself and just trying to push my own levels of comfort with, starting off with those more, what I would describe as more creative forms of prototyping, but then moving into service design and organizational design and things like that, where you're working with intangibles and trying to make those intangible concepts more tangible in a variety of different forms. And it was, I think, just about being every opportunity I had to try something new, or collaborate with someone where there was this new opportunity, it was about trying it and then seeing how I could, if anything, could have assimilate or adapt that into my practice and my work. So there was someone who was doing a piece of co-design where they were using forum theatre, and that was my first opportunity, and I sort of jumped at the opportunity to sort of help facilitate some sessions within them under their guidance and so on. And that exposure to forum theatre, then later on, several years later, I bumped into Kate Beckett, and she was doing this really robust piece of work that was kind of exploring forum theatre as a method, and little things like that are just opportunities that just kind of grasped that there was something new and different. I guess that's partly my nature and the opportunities that I had. I've been very lucky, but I couldn't. That's just my experience here, and I couldn't tell you of a kind of quicker way or a more systematic way, I'm afraid. I don't know if anyone else has got. Tara, you because you've had you started off with music, but you've gone into the kind of different spaces and places, haven't you?
Yeah, I think it's kind of quite similar. And I mean, when I first, I never ever thought I would end up working at an art school. That wasn't in my plan. And I would say at first I was a skeptic. I openly admit that. But I've been absolutely converted through my experience, because I was coming from a very traditional, psychology background, really, at that time, and then opened up into this world. And yes, never haven't looked back at all. And I think just sort of picking up on another question in the chat, if that's okay, around the question that came in around co-design and differences that we've seen. So, I mean, I think certainly the positive thing is the growth. So I think since I was first introduced to co-design and working in this way, I think we've seen like a huge growth in the way that the approach is used and where it's used and how it's used, and that there's so many different ways of practicing co-design or engaging people in a co-design process. And then I think that's also the the bit that we need to be a little bit cautious of as well, because I think that we're now seeing co-design. It's almost like we need a new term. And certainly when I've been writing recently, I've started to put the word genuine in front of it because I feel like there's a lot of uses of the word sometimes, like co-design, co-production, co-creation. And then when you actually read about the process, you sometimes think, is this truly and genuinely co-design? So I think the positive is the growth, and I think the more that we're seeing people sharing different ways of engaging and different approaches to doing it, it's fantastic. And then, but I do think there's a little bit of caution as well when we're seeing the word being used a lot, and we kind of need to look deeper at how it's being used and how it's being applied as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tara and Joe. I do see your comment there about cobiquity in the chat, and there's some links in there, everyone, and some contacts as well. Now, I'm wondering if because we only have a few minutes left, we can use that Slido now. And the question we want to ask everyone in your thinking and your experiences, how might you integrate creativity into your practice, or what do you do right now? And yeah, I'm sure you've got lots of ideas going through your head. And I know for me, I love the creativity and all the ideas. Sometimes the idea generation and the possibilities seems overwhelming and you don't know where to start. So if you have a thought about how you might start or how you might integrate it into your practice, please do share. There's, let's see, shall I drop the link in the chat again? That should work. And also, if you need a bit of a prompt, I'm wondering when or where in your thinking and planning would you want to make sure you've got creativity at the forefront of your mind? One so far. We got people typing. If you got to go more than one word, Sandra, that's okay. We've got a couple thoughts up there so far that's about images, that visual. Creativity really is about all the senses, or as many as you can get. Thinking about it early, from the beginning. It's definitely not something that you can kind of put in your work plan. And step 1, step 2, step 3, be creative. Step 4, gather people. You kind of have to maybe layer it through. As people are sharing, we got a bunch of people typing right now, and knowing we only have a couple minutes left, I was kind of thinking of some of the thoughts of the themes that we were kind of hearing about: openness and idea generation, kind of coming from stories. I see stories there as well, and what's being shared now, and how images, artifacts, artistic expression, thinking about the theater and music, how those connect to the emotion, our humanness, and that we all have in common. And from an equity-based co-production perspective, everybody has stories and everyone has emotions and everyone has thoughts and ideas, and creating spaces for those to kind of all flow out and click together and take us in new directions seems very much about what Tara and Joe shared today. And I think the pandemic context is very valuable to think about. The pandemic kind of forced us all to do things differently, and that maybe opened up some space for us to not go back to doing things the same as they were before, because we found other ways that are intriguing and kind of connect to our desire to create, and that's that growth that you were talking about, Tara. And we definitely learned during the pandemic that that lots of things can still happen and be great and feel good, even though there's a lot of uncertainty. And so that kind of ties back to that very first thought. And Michelle, the comment that you shared in the chat about, why don't we have happiness as an outcome more often? It's not just about the things we do or what we produce, but how we get there. And it should feel good in order for us to want to do more of it. Does anyone else have any last thoughts to share in this last minute? I see there's a question in the chat from Jenny. We'll maybe look into that and post links with the recording.
I just want to say a huge thank you to Tara and to Joe for joining us here today and having this conversation and presenting your work and showing us all of the different ways in which you can be creative. When we were having early conversations about this, as Louise was sort of getting at that idea of not just planning, like, here's the creativity and we'll just do this like at this later stage. It's about integrating it and how to do that and thinking about everyone has creative aspects and it's what people bring. And hopefully you've seen different ways that creativity has been used to co-produce different aspects of research, all different ways of outcomes. And we hope that we have encouraged you, inspired you to integrate this into your practice, to reach out, to read these papers, and get in touch with people who are doing this as well. So a huge thanks to our presenters, to our audience for being here today. And we hope you have a great day. And if you have any questions, please reach out and we will follow up with the links in the recording as well.
And an evaluation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.